In 1951, Iranians elected Mohammad Mosaddegh as prime minister. Mosaddegh was a nationalist lawyer who had spent decades arguing for one thing, that Iran's oil belonged to Iran. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, majority owned by the British government, had been extracting Iranian oil since 1913 and paying Iran a royalty that Mosaddegh considered theft. Britain received more in taxes from the company than Iran received in royalties from its own oil. Mosaddegh nationalized the company in May 1951. Britain was furious and organized an international boycott of Iranian oil. The Iranian economy began collapsing. Mosaddegh, increasingly isolated, appealed to the United States for support. The Truman administration was sympathetic. America had its own complicated feelings about European colonialism. But Truman was replaced by Eisenhower in January 1953, and Eisenhower's team saw the situation differently. The Cold War framing was simple. Mosaddegh was weakening Iran's economy, the Communist Tudeh Party was growing in influence, and a destabilized Iran on the Soviet border was a strategic catastrophe waiting to happen. Whether Mosaddegh himself was a communist threat was almost beside the point. The vulnerability he represented was enough. In August 1953, the CIA and British intelligence launched Operation Ajax, a coup that overthrew Mosaddegh, arrested him, and restored full power to Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had briefly fled the country when it appeared Mosaddegh might survive. The Shah ruled Iran for the next 26 years. He was pro-Western, anti-Soviet, and willing to sell oil on terms that suited Britain and America. Savak, his secret police, tortured and killed political opponents with a thoroughness that the American administration supporting him preferred not to examine too closely. Iran was stable, strategically reliable, and repressive in ways that were considered someone else's problem. The bill came due in 1979. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was not a CIA operation or a foreign conspiracy. It was a genuinely popular uprising against a regime that had modernized Iran's economy while systematically destroying its political life. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had been in exile since 1964, expelled by the Shah for his opposition to land reform and women's suffrage, which Khomeini opposed on religious grounds. From exile in Iraq and then France, he had spent 15 years building a network and a message. The Shah was a corrupt American puppet, Islam was the answer, the revolution was the obligation of every believing Iranian. When the revolution came in January and February 1979, it came fast. The Shah left Iran on January 16th, officially for medical treatment. He never returned. Khomeini arrived in Tehran on February 1st to a crowd of millions. The Islamic Republic was proclaimed in April after a referendum. The American embassy in Tehran was seized in November 1979 by Iranian students, with Khomeini's support following the Carter administration's decision to admit the Shah to the United States for cancer treatment. 52 American diplomats were held hostage for 444 days. The crisis destroyed Carter's presidency, defined American public perception of Iran for a generation, and established a pattern of confrontation that has never fully resolved. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, the exact moment Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. The timing has been the subject of conspiracy theories ever since, with allegations that Reagan's team negotiated a delay in the release to damage Carter. This has never been definitively proven or definitively disproven. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran. Saddam had multiple motivations: territorial disputes over the Shatt al-Arab waterway, fear of the revolution spreading to Iraq's Shia majority, and an opportunity to seize Iranian territory while the new revolutionary government was disorganized. He expected a quick victory. He got an 8-year war that killed somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. The United States supported Iraq, not openly, not consistently, and not without complications, but substantially. American intelligence shared satellite imagery of Iranian troop positions with Baghdad. American agricultural credits freed up Iraqi money for weapons purchases. When Iraq used chemical weapons against Iranian troops and Kurdish civilians, the Reagan administration blocked UN condemnation and continued the relationship. Donald Rumsfeld visited Baghdad in 1983 as a special envoy and shook Saddam's hand while American officials were privately acknowledging that Iraq was using chemical weapons. The justification was strategic. A revolutionary Iran that might spread Islamist governance across the Gulf was considered a greater threat than an Iraq that was winning a war with chemical weapons. The same Saddam Hussein that America would later invade twice was, in the 1980s, an American strategic partner. Iran knew this. It has not forgotten. The war ended in a UN-brokered ceasefire in 1988, with neither side having achieved its objectives and both sides exhausted. Khomeini described accepting the ceasefire as drinking poison. Iran emerged with its revolution intact, its military experienced, its population traumatized, and its conviction that the outside world, America specifically, would support its enemies with any available means. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through those 21 miles passes approximately 20% of the world's oil supply, about 17 million barrels per day. Every major oil exporter in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, ships through Hormuz. The only alternatives are pipelines that bypass the strait and carry a fraction of the volume, and that would take years and enormous investment to expand to meaningful capacity. Iran sits on the northern shore of the strait. It has coastal missile batteries, a submarine fleet, fast attack boats, and the demonstrated willingness to use all of them. In 1988, during the tanker war phase of the Iraq-Iran conflict, the Iranian Navy mined international waters, attacked neutral shipping, and engaged the American Navy in the largest naval battle since World War II, Operation Praying Mantis, in which the US destroyed half of Iran's operational navy in a single day. Iran cannot close Hormuz permanently. The American Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, has the firepower to reopen it. But Iran can make Hormuz dangerous enough to spike oil prices, disrupt global supply chains, and impose costs on any military operation against it. The threat of closure is Iran's most powerful strategic card, and everyone involved knows it. The Strait is not just an economic choke point. It is the physical embodiment of the entire strategic relationship between Iran and the West, a narrow passage where Iranian leverage and American power face each other across 21 miles of water. Iran's nuclear program began in the 1950s, with American help. The Atoms for Peace program under Eisenhower provided Iran's first research reactor. The Shah, with American encouragement, developed nuclear ambitions that were considered legitimate at the time. The revolution changed the calculation entirely. A nuclear-armed Islamic Republic on the Persian Gulf was not what anyone in Washington had intended to create. Iran's nuclear program continued after the revolution, largely covert until 2002, when an Iranian opposition group revealed the existence of uranium enrichment facilities at Natanz and a heavy water reactor at Arak that had not been disclosed to the International Atomic Energy Agency. What followed was 2 decades of sanctions, negotiations, sabotage, and assassination. The Stuxnet virus, a cyber weapon developed jointly by the United States and Israel, destroyed approximately 1,000 Iranian centrifuges between 2009 and 2010, setting the program back by an estimated 2 years. Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in Tehran, car bombs, motorcycle-mounted shooters, in operations that Iran attributed to Israel and the West denied. Iran accelerated its enrichment in response to each setback. The economic pressure from sanctions was real and severe. Iranian oil exports fell by more than half. The currency collapsed. Inflation reached levels that devastated middle-class savings. The Iranian population absorbed the cost while the government argued, not entirely incorrectly, that the sanctions were collective punishment of civilians for decisions made by a government they hadn't chosen. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal, was signed by Iran, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China. Iran agreed to reduce its enriched uranium stockpile by 98%, limit enrichment to 3.67%, and accept intrusive inspections. In exchange, sanctions were lifted and frozen Iranian assets were released. It was the most significant diplomatic achievement in the region in decades. It lasted 3 years. In 2018, Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement, describing it as the worst deal ever negotiated. Iran had been complying with its terms. The IAEA confirmed this repeatedly. The reimposed American sanctions were described by the Trump administration as maximum pressure, a strategy designed to force Iran back to the table for a more comprehensive agreement that addressed Iranian missile programs and regional behavior, not just nuclear enrichment. Iran's position was that it had upheld its end of an agreement and been sanctioned anyway. that no agreement with the United States was worth the paper it was written on because the next administration could simply cancel it. It began incrementally violating the deal's terms, increasing enrichment levels, reducing inspector access, installing more advanced centrifuges. By 2023, Iran's uranium enrichment had reached 84% purity, just below the 90% considered weapons grade. The conflict between the United States and Iran has not been fought directly since 1988. It has been fought through proxies across the entire Middle East. Iran supports Hezbollah in Lebanon, the most militarily capable non-state armed group in the world, with a missile arsenal larger than most European armies. Iran supports Hamas in Gaza and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank. Iran supports the Houthi movement in Yemen, which has been fighting a Saudi-led coalition since 2015 and attacking shipping in the Red Sea since late 2023. Iran supports Shia militia groups in Iraq that have attacked American military installations repeatedly since 2019. The United States counters through its military presence across the Gulf, bases in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, through arms sales to Gulf states, through intelligence sharing with Israel, and through direct strikes on Iranian-linked targets in Iraq and Syria. In January 2020, the United States assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, the external operations arm of the Revolutionary Guards, in a drone strike at Baghdad airport. Soleimani had been the architect of Iran's proxy network across the region for 2 decades. His assassination was the most direct American strike on a senior Iranian official in the conflict's history. Iran responded with ballistic missile strikes on American bases in Iraq, the largest direct Iranian military attack on American forces ever conducted. No Americans were killed, though over 100 suffered traumatic brain injuries that the Trump administration initially described as headaches. Both sides stepped back from the edge. The pattern continued. The events of 2023 and 2024 accelerated tensions that had been building for years. Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, and the subsequent Israeli military campaign in Gaza activated Iran's entire proxy network simultaneously. Hezbollah exchanged fire with Israel along the Lebanese border daily. The Houthis began attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea, disrupting global supply chains and forcing a significant rerouting of maritime trade. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria attacked American bases over 150 times in the months following October 7th. In April 2024, Iran launched a direct attack on Israel for the first time in the two countries' history. Over 300 drones and missiles fired from Iranian territory in response to an Israeli strike on an Iranian consular building in Damascus that killed senior Revolutionary Guards officers. Israel, with American, British, French, and Jordanian assistance, intercepted the vast majority. Israel's subsequent response strike was limited, a signal of capability rather than escalation. The situation in early 2025 involves a region where every significant conflict connects to the Iran-America axis in some way. The Gaza war, the Lebanese conflict, the Houthi campaign in the Red Sea, the militia attacks in Iraq, all of them are threads in the same fabric. Iran's calculation has been consistent for 40 years. That direct confrontation with American military power is suicidal, but that proxy pressure applied across multiple fronts simultaneously imposes costs that the United States cannot sustain indefinitely without either escalating to a war neither side wants or accepting Iranian regional influence it has spent 40 years trying to prevent. America's calculation has been equally consistent, that Iran's behavior, its proxy networks, its nuclear program, its regional ambitions, represents a threat that cannot be accommodated but has never been worth the cost of direct military confrontation. The result is a conflict that has lasted longer than any other in American foreign policy history, without either resolution or escalation to its logical conclusion, a grinding, expensive, periodically deadly standoff conducted through proxies, sanctions, sabotage, and carefully limited military strikes over a strait 21 miles wide that neither side can afford to close and neither side can afford to ignore. The 1953 coup that overthrew Mosaddegh cost the CIA approximately $200,000 to execute. The consequences are still being paid.